There are few secrets in the dying light of the 41st millennium more carefully guarded than those buried beneath the imperial palace. For 10,000 years, the foundations of Terra's greatest fortress have held more than the weight of marble and adamantine. They have held the weight of truths too terrible for even the Imperium's mightiest servants to bear. Archmagos Belisarius Cole had descended deeper than any living soul in recorded history. His augmetic limbs clicked and whirred against the ancient stone as servo skulls danced around him, their auspex beams cutting through shadows that had not seen light since the heresy itself. The air here tasted of age and forgotten oaths, thick with the dust of millennia. "Fascinating!" Cole's vox grill crackled, the sound echoing off walls that predated the Imperium. His optical mechadendrites swiveled to examine engravings older than most star systems, script in languages that had died with old Earth's final wars. Yet he was not here for archaeological wonder. He was here because the Omnissiah's will had guided him to this place, to this moment that balanced on the knife's edge of destiny. The excavation had begun 3 Terran months ago, triggered by seismic readings that defied explanation. Deep beneath the Sanctum Imperialis, something had stirred. Not the familiar vibrations of the palace's mighty machinery, but something else. Something that pulsed with the rhythm of a sleeping heart. Cole's servo skulls scattered as his bulk navigated a passage so narrow it seemed designed to exclude all but the most determined. The walls pressed close, carved from living rock and reinforced with materials that his sensors could not fully identify. Ceramite, yes, but shot through with psychic resonance that made his augmetic spine tingle with unease. The passage opened into a chamber that defied the palace's known architecture. Circular walls rose beyond the reach of his illumination, their surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift when observed directly. At the chamber's heart stood an altar of black stone, its surface mirror-smooth except for the elaborate sigil carved into its center. The Sigillite's mark, Malcador's personal seal, wrought in lines of gold that still gleamed with inner fire after 10 millennia. "By the Omnissiah's gears," Cowell whispered, his vocal synthesizers struggling to process the magnitude of the discovery. He had found many secrets in his long existence, but none that bore the personal mark of the Emperor's most trusted advisor. None that hummed with such barely contained power. The altar was not empty. At its center sat a crystalline device, no larger than a human skull, its faceted surface capturing and reflecting light that seemed to come from within. Psychic resonance patterns danced across Cole's senses like storm-born lightning, contained but not dormant. Waiting. Servo skulls circled the altar with mechanical devotion, their auger arrays recording every detail. The crystal sat within a depression carved to receive it precisely, surrounded by a series of smaller symbols that Cole recognized as temporal markers. Dates, rendered in the high Gothic numerology of Terra's ancient courts. His optical mechadendrites extended, tracing the symbols with reverent precision. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity, marking not a specific date, but a duration. 10,000 Terran years, measured from a starting point that made Cole's synthetic hearts skip in their adamantine housings. The date of Malcador the Sigillite's death. Primarch. Cowell's voice carried across the palace's vox networks with uncharacteristic urgency. "Lord Gilliman, your presence is required in the deep foundations. Immediately." The response crackled through static-laden channels, tinged with the weight of command and barely contained exhaustion. "Explain your urgency, Archmagos. I have little patience for mysteries today." "My lord, I have discovered something that requires discretion. A message sealed by Malcador himself, timed to open precisely 10,000 years after his sacrifice." Today, Lord Primarch. Today marks the anniversary to the hour. Silence stretched across the Vox channel, pregnant with implications that neither dared voice. When Guilliman's response came, it carried the weight of inevitability. "I am on my way." Carl waited in the chamber's oppressive silence, his chronometers marking each second with mechanical precision. The crystal pulsed in response to his presence, its psychic emanations growing stronger as the appointed hour approached. Whatever Malcador had sealed within this device, it had been waiting for this exact moment, patient as the stone of terror itself. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the passage, heavy and measured. Robert Guilliman emerged from the darkness like a figure from legend, his blue and gold armor catching the crystal's inner light. The Primarch's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held the weight of 10,000 years of service and the bitter wisdom that came with survival. "Show me," Guilliman commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded star systems. Call's mechadendrites gestured toward the altar. "The temporal mechanisms activated precisely 17 minutes ago, my lord. The crystal awaits only your touch to release its contents." Guilliman approached the altar with the caution of a veteran warrior, his enhanced senses analyzing every detail. The Sigillite's mark seemed to pulse in recognition of his presence, as if the device could distinguish between the gene-forged and the merely mortal. "Malcador left this for the Primarchs specifically," Carl continued, his sensors detecting subtle changes in the crystal's resonance. "The psychic locks will not recognize my touch, nor that of any lesser being. Only one of the Emperor's sons can unlock what lies within." The Primarch's gauntleted hand hovered over the crystal, trembling with an emotion he could not name. 10,000 years of duty had taught him to expect betrayal, to anticipate the worst interpretations of every discovery. Yet something in this chamber spoke of deeper truths, of secrets that had shaped the very foundations of the Imperium. "What if this knowledge proves too terrible to bear?" Guilliman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cowl's optical array focused on his genetic superior. "Then we shall bear it nonetheless, my lord, as we have borne all truths that have come before." Guilliman's hand descended, his fingertips making contact with the crystal's surface. The chamber exploded with light not seen, but felt, a psychic radiance that set both their souls ablaze with recognition and terror. The crystal cracked along its faceted surface, revealing the hollow core within. There, suspended in crystalline matrices that defied understanding, hung a sphere of pure psychic energy. Malcador's final message, preserved in a medium that could survive the death of stars. As the sphere pulsed with awakening power, Guilliman and Cole shared a moment of perfect understanding. Whatever knowledge the Sigillite had deemed too dangerous for his own time, whatever truth he had hidden for 10 millennia, was about to reshape everything they thought they knew about the Imperium's founding. The chamber filled with the echo of ancient words, spoken by a voice that had been silent since the Siege of Terra. Malcador the Sigillite, hero of the Imperium, was about to speak from beyond the grave. And the galaxy would never be the same. The psychic sphere blazed with energy that transcended the physical realm, its light casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Guilliman felt the familiar weight of psychic presence pressing against his mind, but this was not the overwhelming force of the warp's denizens. This carried the distinctive resonance of terror itself, of oaths sworn in the Emperor's presence and secrets sealed with blood. The sphere pulsed once, twice, and then erupted in a cascade of golden fire that took the shape of memory itself. Malcador the Sigillite stood before them, not as the withered corpse who had sacrificed himself upon the golden throne, but as he had been in his prime. Tall and austere, wrapped in robes that seemed to contain starlight, His presence filled the chamber with an authority that had once commanded the loyalty of worlds. His eyes, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, fixed upon Guilliman, with the weight of prophecy fulfilled. "My Lord Primarch," the echo spoke, its voice carrying the harmonics of absolute truth. "If you hear these words, then 10,000 years have passed since my death, and the Imperium endures. That alone brings me solace beyond measure." Cowl's mechadendrites twitched in response to the psychic emanations, his sensors recording energy patterns that defied classification. The Archmagos remained silent, understanding that he witnessed a moment that would reshape the foundations of Imperial doctrine. Malcador's projection stepped forward, each movement carrying the grace of one who had walked beside gods. "Yet if you have found this message, then the burden I placed upon your father's shoulders has grown too heavy. The truth I sealed away has become necessary, not for understanding the past, but for surviving what is to come." Guilliman's jaw tightened. 10,000 years of warfare had taught him to recognize the prelude to devastating revelation. "Speak plainly, Sigillite. What truth was worth hiding for 10 millennia? The psychic echo smiled with infinite sadness. "The truth about the golden throne, my lord. The truth about who was truly meant to sit upon it for eternity." The chamber grew colder despite the crystal's radiance. Guilliman felt his twin hearts beat in perfect synchronization as dread settled upon him, like a funeral shroud. "Magnus the Red," Malcador continued, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic tragedy, "was never your father's first choice. The Crimson King was brilliant, yes, powerful beyond measure, but he was not the son the Emperor intended to chain to Terra's heart." Cowl's optical mechadendrites swiveled in perfect unison, focusing on the projection with mechanical precision. His cogitators processed implications that threatened to overwhelm even his enhanced consciousness. "Then who?" Guilliman's voice was barely above a whisper. Malcador's projection turned toward the Primarch, and for a moment the psychic echo seemed to see not just the present, but the weight of 10,000 years of war and suffering that had brought them to this moment. "Sanguinius," the Sigillite said, and the name hung in the air like a prayer and a curse combined. "The angel, your most beloved brother. He was the one truly meant for the golden throne." The words struck Guilliman like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Memories flooded through his consciousness. Sanguinius at the Emperor's side during the Great Crusade, his prescient warnings that had saved countless lives, the way their father's eyes had lingered on the angel with something beyond mere affection. Love, yes, but also the terrible weight of foreknowledge. "No," Guilliman breathed, but even as denial escaped his lips, the truth of it settled into his bones like poison. Malcador's echo continued with relentless compassion. "Your brother possessed gifts that even Magnus could not match. Not raw power, though Sanguinius was mighty beyond measure. Not knowledge, though his wisdom exceeded that of scholars. Sanguinius possessed the rarest gift of all, perfect nobility of spirit combined with the foresight to guide humanity through the darkness ahead." The projection gestured toward the chamber's walls, and the ancient symbols carved there began to glow with inner fire. Suddenly they were not mere decorations, but a chronicle written in the language of prophecy itself. "The Emperor saw the future that awaited us all." Malcador's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "The long twilight of the Imperium, the endless wars, the slow decay of hope itself. He knew that whoever sat upon the golden throne would need more than psychic might. They would need the strength to inspire loyalty across 10,000 years of darkness." Guilliman staggered as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami of revelation. Sanguinius, beloved by all who served beside him. Sanguinius, whose very presence had turned the tide of battles through inspiration alone. Sanguinius, who had died aboard the vengeful spirit, not in ignorance, but knowing exactly what future he was sacrificing for humanity. Magnus was the decoy, the Sigillite continued, his psychic form beginning to flicker as the crystal's energy waned. The Red King's pride and curiosity made him the perfect distraction. While the galaxy watched his fall to chaos, none questioned why the Emperor seemed so devastated by the loss of one son when he had 17 others. 18, Guilliman corrected automatically, then stopped as deeper understanding dawned. The missing Primarchs were never intended for this burden, Malcador confirmed. Their fates were sealed by other necessities, other futures that had to be prevented. But Sanguinius, your father loved him too much to doom him to eternal servitude. When the choice came, save the angel or preserve the plan, the Emperor chose love over duty. The chamber trembled as the psychic resonance reached its crescendo. Cowl's sensors detected massive energy fluctuations throughout the palace's deep foundations, as if the very stones were reacting to this fundamental challenge of established truth. Why? Guilliman's voice cracked with the weight of 10 millennia's worth of questions. Why hide this? Why let Magnus believe he was chosen? Malcador's projection began to fade, but his voice remained strong. Because Magnus would have tried to claim the throne by force, and in doing so would have doomed us all. Better that he rage in exile than tear the Imperium apart in pursuit of what he believed was rightfully his. And because your father hoped, even then, that another way might be found. The psychic echo raised one translucent hand in benediction and warning combined. But no other way was found, Lord Guilliman. The Golden Throne still requires a perfect soul to guide it, and the angel's essence still calls out across the warp to his scattered sons. The blood angels carry more than gene seed in their veins. They carry the echo of their Primarch's intended destiny. The projection was dissolving now, returning to the formless energy from which it had emerged. Yet Malcador's final words rang with prophetic certainty. The hour approaches when the choice must be made again. The Emperor weakens, and the throne requires a successor capable of bearing not just its power, but its terrible purpose. Remember this truth, son of the Emperor. Magnus was never meant to save humanity. That burden was always Sanguinius's to bear. The golden light faded, leaving Guilliman and Call alone in a chamber that suddenly felt vast and empty. The crystal had crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled after 10,000 years of patient waiting. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications that neither dared voice. Finally, Guilliman spoke, his voice hollow with the weight of cosmic truth. Everything we believed about the heresy, about Magnus's fall, about the throne itself, he could not finish the sentence, was built upon a foundation of noble lies, Cole completed, his synthesized voice unusually subdued. The question now, my lord, is what we do with this knowledge. Guilliman stared at the remnants of the crystal, his mind reeling with the implications. Sanguinius, dead for 10 millennia, had been humanity's intended eternal guardian. The brother he had loved above all others had died, not in ignorance of his fate, but in deliberate sacrifice to escape it. Yet if Malcador spoke truth, then the angel's destiny remained unfulfilled, and the Imperium still needed its perfect guardian. The question that would haunt Guilliman's dreams was simple and terrible. Was there still time to correct his father's choice, or had 10,000 years of war and decay made such perfection impossible to reclaim? The chamber's ancient stones offered no answers, only the weight of truth too vast for any one soul to bear alone. The archives beneath the imperial palace held more than books and data slates. They held the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated secrets, each revelation more carefully guarded than the last. Guilliman descended through levels that few living souls had ever seen, his footsteps echoing against walls lined with knowledge that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of its own history. Carl followed in respectful silence, his servo-skulls maintaining a careful distance as they navigated corridors that predated the Imperium itself. The Archmagos understood that what they sought lay beyond the reach of ordinary records. They hunted for the Emperor's private thoughts, preserved in formats that only the highest clearance could access. Here, Guilliman's voice carried the weight of inevitability as he stopped before a vault door marked with seals that bore his father's personal cipher. The locks recognized his genetic pattern instantly, ancient mechanisms responding to the touch of Primarch genecraft with the same reverence they had shown 10 millennia past. The vault beyond contained not the towering data stacks of lesser archives, but something far more precious. Crystalline memory cores hung suspended in stasis fields, each one containing direct psychic imprints from the Emperor himself. His private journals, his strategic assessments, his deepest fears about the future that awaited humanity among the stars. Guilliman's enhanced senses detected the psychic resonance immediately. These were not mere records, but fragments of consciousness itself, preserved with technology that married the pinnacle of Dark Age science with arts that bordered on the divine. "The Primarch files," Cowell whispered, his voice crackling with awe. "I had theorized their existence, but never dared hope to witness them. Each crystal was labeled with high Gothic script, so ancient that even Guilliman required a moment to decipher the archaic forms. His eyes swept across familiar names, Horus, Fulgrim, Dawn, Khan, until they settled upon the entry that made his twin hearts skip their rhythm. Sanguinius, Sun 9, the Angel of Baal. The crystal containing his brother's file pulsed with warm golden light, as if responding to Guilliman's presence. With trembling fingers that had commanded star fleets and shattered worlds, he lifted the memory core from its housing and felt the immediate rush of psychic contact. The Emperor's voice filled his consciousness, not with the overwhelming presence of divinity, but with the quiet intensity of a father discussing his most beloved child. "Of all my sons, Sanguinius alone possesses the gift I most desperately need. His foresight reaches beyond the immediate future, beyond the tactical concerns that occupy his brothers' minds. When the angel dreams, he sees not days or months ahead, but decades, centuries, the broad strokes of destiny itself." Guilliman felt the crystal's memories unfold like flowers blooming in his mind. He witnessed moments he had never been present for, conversations held in the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace, while the Great Crusade blazed across the galaxy. The Emperor stood before a massive hololithic display, showing the galaxy's spiral arms, each system marked with the progress of the Crusade fleets. Yet his attention focused not on present conquests, but on projections that stretched millennia into the future. Beside him, Sanguinius studied the display, with eyes that held the weight of terrible knowledge. "Father," the angel's voice carried the musical quality that had inspired loyalty in billions of souls. "The visions grow stronger. I see the throne of gold and the chains that bind whoever sits upon it. The galaxy burns while its guardian watches, unable to act save through others." The Emperor's response resonated with profound sadness. "You see truly, my son. Yet someone must bear this burden, or humanity will face extinction in the darkness between stars." "Why must it be one of us?" Sanguinius asked, his wings rustling with barely contained emotion. "Why not you? Why not eternal rule by one who has guided humanity since its earliest days?" The Emperor turned to face his son, and Guilliman felt the full weight of his father's anguish transmitted through the crystal's psychic matrix. "Because I am flawed, Sanguinius. I am proud, autocratic, and too willing to sacrifice individuals for the greater good. The guardian of humanity's future must possess virtues I lack: compassion tempered by wisdom, nobility that inspires rather than demands, and the foresight to guide without becoming a tyrant. Sanguinius bowed his head, understanding passing between father and son like a current of electricity. You would make me humanity's eternal shepherd. I would give you the power to save them from themselves, the Emperor corrected. Your foresight shows you the paths ahead. Which road leads to survival, and which to extinction? The memory shifted, and Guilliman witnessed his brother's response. Sanguinius closed his eyes, his psychic gifts reaching across time itself to touch futures that had not yet crystallized into reality. When he spoke, his voice carried the hollow certainty of prophecy fulfilled. I see two primary paths, Father. In the first, I accept the throne and guide humanity through 10,000 years of darkness toward a distant dawn. The Imperium endures, grows stronger, and eventually reclaims its promise. But the cost? He shuddered, his perfect features twisting with pain. The cost is my soul, consumed piece by piece over the millennia until nothing remains but duty incarnate. And the second path? I refuse, and the throne claims another. The Imperium survives, but barely, sustained by will and faith rather than foresight. Countless billions die who might have lived, entire worlds fall that might have stood, and humanity's future hangs forever balanced on the knife's edge of extinction. The Emperor absorbed this revelation in silence, his expression revealing the impossible weight of such knowledge. Finally, he spoke with the quiet authority that had shaped the fate of worlds. If I asked it of you, would you accept the throne willingly? Sanguinius met his father's gaze without flinching. Yes, for humanity's sake, I would accept any burden. The memory crystal pulsed, and Guilliman felt another layer of revelation unfold. He saw his father in private contemplation, witnessed the Emperor's struggle with a choice that would define the next 10 millennia of human history. Yet how can I doom my most noble son to such a fate? The Emperor whispered to the empty air. How can I ask him to sacrifice not just his life, but his very essence for the sake of others? If there is any other way, any possibility of preserving both Sanguinius and humanity's future. The crystal's memories revealed the Emperor's desperate search for alternatives, experiments with other Primarchs, assessments of their psychic potential, investigations into technologies that might reduce the throne's requirements. Magnus the Red featured prominently in these studies, not because he was the preferred choice, but because he was the acceptable sacrifice if no other option presented itself. Magnus possesses the raw power, one notation read, but lacks the temperamental stability required for millennial service. His pride and curiosity make him vulnerable to corruption, yet these same traits make him eager to claim any role offered. He would accept the throne gladly, seeing it as validation of his superiority over his brothers. Another entry revealed the true scope of the Emperor's deception. Let Magnus believe himself chosen, while I continue seeking alternatives. His ambition serves as useful misdirection, preventing others from questioning why certain sons receive more attention than their brothers merit. The final memory in the crystal struck Guilliman like a physical blow. The Emperor, alone in his private chambers after receiving word of Sanguinius's death aboard the vengeful spirit, collapsed to his knees with grief that transcended mortal understanding. "My perfect son," the Emperor whispered, his voice breaking with loss, absolute. "I failed you. I chose your freedom over humanity's future, and now both are lost. The plan dies with you, my angel, and we are all poorer for my weakness." The memory crystal went dark, leaving Guilliman alone, with knowledge that felt too vast for his mind to contain. The full scope of his father's anguish crashed over him like a tide of revelation. The Emperor had possessed a path to humanity's salvation, a future guided by perfect wisdom and compassion, and had chosen love over duty when the moment of decision arrived. Lord Primarch. Cowl's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you well? Guilliman opened eyes he did not remember closing, feeling aged beyond his millennia of existence. Sanguinius could have saved us all, Archmagus. His foresight was not mere tactical prescience, but true prophecy. He saw the heresy coming, saw the long war that followed, saw every tragedy that has befallen the Imperium over 10,000 years. And yet he died anyway, Carl observed with mechanical precision, because our father loved him too much to condemn him to eternal servitude. Guilliman's voice carried the weight of cosmic tragedy. The Emperor chose Sanguinius's happiness over humanity's salvation, and we have all paid the price, ever since. The vault fell silent, except for the soft hum of stasis fields and the distant vibrations of the palace's mighty machinery. Guilliman understood now why the revelation had been sealed away for 10 millennia. This was knowledge too terrible for any age to bear. The understanding that paradise had been within reach, lost not through enemy action or cosmic inevitability, but through a father's love for his son. Yet as Guilliman stared at the darkened crystal, another realization began to form. If Sanguinius's destiny remained unfulfilled, if the angel's essence still called out across the galaxy to his scattered sons, then perhaps the Emperor's perfect plan was not lost forever. Perhaps it was simply waiting for someone with the will to see it completed, regardless of the cost in love or mercy that such completion would demand. The journey to Baal carried weight beyond the mere crossing of stellar distances. Guilliman's strike cruiser cut through the warp with purpose that transcended navigation, bearing knowledge that would reshape one of the Imperium's most noble chapters. The Blood Angels had served with distinction for 10 millennia, their gene seed carrying both blessing and curse in equal measure. Yet none among them suspected that their afflictions were the echo of a destiny their Primarch had been denied. The red world hung before them like a wound against the stars, its surface scarred by millennia of conflict and the nuclear fires that had nearly consumed it during the war against the Tyranids. Yet Baal endured, as the Blood Angels themselves endured, sustained by faith and the memory of their fallen angel. Chapter Master Dante met Guilliman at the fortress monastery's gates, his ancient armor gleaming despite the weight of 17 centuries of war. The death mask of Sanguinius covered his features, but his bearing spoke of weariness that transcended mortal understanding. Here stood a warrior who had fought longer than some star systems had existed, sustained only by duty and the hope that his service honored his Primarch's memory. Lord Guilliman! Dante's voice carried the resonance of absolute authority, tempered by deep respect. Your arrival brings honor to Baal, though I sense this is not a ceremonial visit. Indeed not, Chapter Master. What I bring will challenge everything your chapter believes about its purpose and destiny. Guilliman's words hung heavy in the monastery's hallowed air, where the scent of incense mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. They gathered in the hall of Sanguinius, beneath the towering statue of the angel that had watched over Blood Angel's deliberations for 10,000 years. Dante was joined by his senior officers, Chief Librarian Mephiston, the Lord of Death, whose psychic powers had transcended even the red thirst itself, and Captain Erasmus Tycho, whose nobility exemplified the chapter's highest ideals. The assembled Space Marines knelt as tradition demanded, but Guilliman gestured for them to rise. What I share requires your full attention, not genuflection. The truth I bear concerns your gene sire directly. Mephiston's eyes suddenly blazed with psychic fire, his enhanced senses detecting the weight of revelation that clung to Guilliman like morning mist. My lord, the warp grows turbulent around you. Whatever knowledge you carry resonates with powers beyond the physical realm. Then you sense correctly, Chief Librarian. Guilliman's gaze swept across the assembled warriors, these sons of Sanguinius who had carried their father's legacy through centuries of darkness. 3 days ago, Archmagos Cawl, uncovered a message sealed by Malcador the Sigillite himself, timed to open 10,000 years after his death. The revelation it contained changes everything we believed about the Golden Throne. The silence that followed was not mere quiet, but the absence of breath itself, as if the very air waited for words that would reshape reality. Sanguinius was not chosen for greatness among his brothers, Guilliman continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He was chosen for sacrifice beyond imagination. The Emperor's original plan called for your Primarch to sit upon the Golden Throne for eternity, guiding humanity with his perfect foresight and noble spirit. Dante staggered, as if struck by a physical blow, his ancient frame trembling with the magnitude of this revelation. The death mask slipped slightly, revealing features aged beyond their years by the weight of command and the slow poison of time. "No," Dante whispered, but even as denial escaped his lips, the truth of it settled into his consciousness like acid. Our father was meant for the throne? Magnus the Red was merely a decoy, Guilliman explained, watching the impact of his words ripple through the assembled warriors. The Emperor allowed the galaxy to believe the Crimson King was his chosen successor while hiding his true intentions. Sanguinius possessed not just psychic might, but the perfect combination of wisdom, nobility, and foresight needed to guide humanity through the darkness ahead. Mephiston suddenly cried out, his psychic barriers crumbling as visions flooded his consciousness. Golden light blazed from his eyes as images from across time crashed over him. Sanguinius, standing before the Golden Throne in majesty and terrible purpose, his wings spread wide as he accepted the burden of eternal guardianship. "I see him," Mephiston gasped, his voice distorting as psychic energy coursed through his vocal cords. "I see our father as he was meant to be, not fallen in battle, but crowned in duty, the angel eternal, watching over humanity's children across the centuries." The chief librarian's words struck the assembled blood angels like thunder from a clear sky. Several fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their Primarch's intended destiny. This was not mere honor, but cosmic purpose, on a scale that dwarfed even their proudest victories. Dante removed his death mask entirely, revealing features that bore the weight of 17 centuries, but now blazed with terrible understanding. "The dreams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The visions that come to us in our darkest moments. We thought them memories of Sanguinius's death, but they were echoes of his intended future," Guilliman confirmed. "Your gene seed carries more than the angel's physical legacy. It carries the psychic imprint of his denied destiny." Captain Tycho stepped forward, his scarred features twisted with emotion. "My lord, this explains the legends our librarians dismissed as myth. The ancient texts speak of the angel's crown, a vision that came to our founders in the early days after the heresy. They saw Sanguinius not as a fallen hero, but as humanity's eternal protector." Mephiston's eyes continued to blaze with psychic fire as deeper visions unfolded. "The red thirst," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from beyond the physical realm. "It is not corruption or weakness. It is our gene seed reaching toward the psychic sustenance our father would have drawn from the Golden Throne. We hunger not for blood, but for the spiritual connection he was meant to provide." The revelation struck the assembled warriors like a second thunderbolt. The curse they had borne for 10 millennia, the affliction that marked them as different from their brother chapters, was not a flaw, but the echo of cosmic purpose. Their bodies and souls still yearned for the connection their Primarch had been meant to forge. "And the Black Rage?" Dante asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "The death echo of a future that never came to pass," Guilliman explained. "Your brothers do not merely relive Sanguinius's final moments aboard the vengeful spirit. They experience the psychic trauma of a destiny cut short, a purpose denied fulfillment." Dante sank into the command throne that had been carved from Baal's living rock, his massive frame dwarfed by the weight of this new understanding. Then we have served not as we chose, but as fate demanded. Every battle, every sacrifice, every brother lost to the rage, all of it in service to a purpose we never knew existed. Yet the purpose remains unfulfilled, Mephiston interjected, his psychic senses detecting currents of possibility that stretched across time itself. The angel's destiny was delayed, not destroyed. The throne still calls for its intended guardian. The implications hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy with meaning that none dared voice directly. If Sanguinius had been meant for the golden throne, if his essence still called out across the warp to his scattered sons, then perhaps the Emperor's perfect plan was not lost forever. Guilliman studied the faces of these noble warriors, seeing in them the same terrible understanding that had struck him in the palace archives. The Blood Angels were not merely space marines serving the Emperor's will. They were the inheritors of a cosmic destiny, the living vessels of their Primarch's denied purpose. "What would you have us do, Lord Guilliman?" Dante asked, his voice carrying the weight of 17 centuries of command decisions. "How do we serve a destiny we never knew existed?" The Primarch's response would echo through the halls of Baal for generations to come, a promise and a warning wrapped in the certainty of genetic inheritance. "We find a way to complete what the Emperor began," Guilliman said, his words carrying the finality of a death sentence and the promise of resurrection combined. "We restore your father to his intended purpose, whatever the cost in blood or sorrow such restoration demands." The Blood Angels knelt as one, not in ceremony, but in recognition of a burden that transcended mortal understanding. They were no longer merely a chapter of Space Marines. They were the guardians of humanity's greatest hope and its most terrible necessity, the living legacy of the angel who had died rather than accept eternal servitude. Yet as they knelt in the shadow of their Primarch's statue, each warrior understood that the choice their father had been spared might soon fall to them. The golden throne still waited for its perfect occupant, and the blood of Sanguinius still flowed in their veins, carrying within it the echo of a destiny that would not be denied forever. The revelation had opened doorways in the minds of the Blood Angels that could never be sealed again. In the days that followed Guilliman's announcement, the fortress monastery of Baal resonated with psychic energies that had lain dormant for 10 millennia. The gene seed of Sanguinius stirred in the veins of his sons, responding to truths that their conscious minds could barely process. Mephiston stood alone in the Chamber of Echoes, the sanctum where Blood Angels librarians communed with the psychic imprints left by their fallen Primarch. The chamber's walls bore the scars of countless rituals, each one an attempt to touch the essence of the angel through prayer and meditation. Yet now, as psychic fire blazed around the chief librarian's form, those same walls trembled with power that transcended mortal understanding. "Show me," Mephiston whispered to the darkness, his consciousness reaching beyond the boundaries of flesh and bone. "Show me what we lost when our father chose death over duty." The warp responded with visions that struck his mind like lightning from a storm-torn sky. Reality dissolved, replaced by images of what could have been, what should have been, if the Emperor's perfect plan had reached its intended conclusion. Sanguinius sat upon the golden throne, but not as the corpse emperor who had ruled the Imperium for 10,000 years. The angel lived, his consciousness spanning the galaxy, while his physical form remained anchored to Terra's heart. His wings, spread wide in eternal vigilance, cast shadows that fell across star systems, each feather containing the wisdom needed to guide humanity through the darkness between worlds. The vision expanded, and Mephiston witnessed the Imperium as it was meant to exist. Worlds burned not with the fires of war, but with the golden radiance of hope fulfilled. The Space Marine legions served not as desperate guardians against extinction, but as shepherds guiding humanity toward a future written in starlight and possibility. "The red thirst," Sanguinius spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across dimensions. "It is not hunger for blood, my son. It is the soul's longing for connection, for the psychic sustenance I was meant to provide from the throne. Every drop of blood your brothers consume is a desperate attempt to fill the void left by my absence." Mephiston felt tears of blood streaming down his cheeks as understanding crashed over him. The curse that had defined his chapter for millennia was not weakness or corruption, but love manifest as anguish. The Blood Angels hungered not for violence, but for the spiritual communion their gene father had been designed to provide. "And the Black Rage?" Mephiston asked, though he dreaded the answer. The vision shifted, showing him battle brothers consumed by the terrible fury that had claimed so many noble souls. Yet now he saw them not as madmen lost to genetic flaw, but as warriors experiencing the psychic echo of destiny denied. Their rage was not directed at Horus alone, but at the cosmic injustice that had severed their connection to their intended purpose. "They rage against the future that was stolen from them," Sanguinius explained, his perfect features marked by sorrow beyond measure. "In their madness, they glimpse what should have been and cannot bear the weight of such loss. Their fury is my fury, transmitted across 10,000 years of separation." The vision expanded further, and Mephiston witnessed the true scope of what had been lost. He saw the Imperium guided by perfect foresight, its armies moving with prophetic precision to counter threats before they fully manifested. He saw worlds saved from extinction, entire sectors preserved by decisions made decades in advance. The Angels' precognitive abilities, channeled through the Golden Throne's vast psychic network, would have made the Imperium not merely a survivor, but a force of destiny itself. "The gene seed remembers," Sanguinius continued, his voice growing fainter as the vision began to fracture. "Every blood angel carries within him the echo of what I was meant to become. Your psychic gifts, your nobility of spirit, your willingness to sacrifice. These are not accidents of genetics, but preparation for a purpose that remains unfulfilled." Mephiston reached toward the fading image of his Primarch, desperate to maintain the connection. "Father, how do we bear this knowledge? How do we serve an empire that exists only in shadow of what it was meant to be? By remembering that purpose, delayed is not purpose denied," the angel replied, his form already dissolving back into the psychic ether. "The throne still calls for its guardian, and my essence still reaches across the void to answer. Death is not the end of destiny, my son. It is merely its postponement." The vision shattered, leaving Mephiston alone in the chamber of echoes, with knowledge that burned in his mind like acid. Yet as the psychic fires dimmed around his form, another presence made itself known, ancient, noble, and hauntingly familiar. The Sanguinor materialized in the chamber's center, its golden form more solid than Mephiston had ever witnessed. The mysterious entity that had appeared to blood angels across the millennia stood revealed not as mere legend, but as something far more significant. "You understand now," the Sanguinor spoke, its voice carrying the musical quality that had once inspired billions to lay down their lives for the Great Crusade. "I am not merely the echo of your Primarch's nobility. I am the fragment of his soul that refused to accept death, while his true purpose remained unfulfilled." Mephiston fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this revelation. The Sanguinor was not just a psychic manifestation born of the Blood Angels' collective faith. It was Sanguinius himself, or at least the part of him that had been intended for the Golden Throne, preserved in the warp through 10 millennia of waiting. "The Emperor's plan was not destroyed when Sanguinius died," the Sanguinor continued, its form pulsing with barely contained power. "It was fractured. My essence, scattered across the galaxy, has spent 10,000 years gathering strength and waiting for the moment when restoration becomes possible." "Then the Primarch can be returned?" Mephiston asked, hardly daring to voice the hope that blazed in his twin hearts. The Sanguinor's response carried both promise and warning. The patterns exist in the warp, the genetic templates remain pure in your gene seed, and the throne still calls for its intended occupant. Yet the cost of such restoration would be beyond your ability to comprehend. To bring back Sanguinius for his true purpose would require not just his resurrection, but his willing acceptance of eternal servitude. The implications struck Mephiston like a physical blow. They could potentially restore their Primarch, but only to condemn him to the very fate he had died to avoid. The choice that had torn the Emperor's heart would fall to Sanguinius's own sons: restore their father to serve humanity forever, or allow the Imperium to continue its slow decay into darkness. The decision approaches, the Sanguinor warned, its form already beginning to fade. Guilliman carries knowledge that could reshape the galaxy, and Cowell possesses technologies that border on heresy. The tools exist to complete the Emperor's original design, but the will to use them must come from those who understand the true cost of such completion. As the angelic figure dissolved back into psychic energy, Mephiston understood that his chapter stood at a crossroads that would define not just their future, but the fate of humanity itself. They were no longer merely space marines serving the Emperor's will. They were the inheritors of a cosmic destiny, the living vessels through which their Primarch's intended purpose might yet be fulfilled. The Blood Angels had always known that their gene seed was both blessing and curse. Now they understood that their afflictions were not flaws to be overcome, but preparations for a purpose that transcended individual lives, or even individual worlds. The red thirst and black rage were not diseases, but the symptoms of souls reaching toward a destiny that had been delayed, but never truly abandoned. In the silence that followed the Sanguinor's departure, Mephiston felt the weight of terrible choice settling upon his shoulders. The path to restoring Sanguinius lay open before them, but walking that path would require them to become what they had always secretly feared: not the Emperor's noble servants, but his willing instruments in a design too vast and terrible for mortal minds to fully comprehend. Yet as he knelt in the Chamber of Echoes, surrounded by the psychic resonance of 10,000 years of accumulated faith, Mephiston knew that the choice had already been made. The Blood Angels would serve their Primarch's true destiny, whatever the cost in love or mercy such service demanded. They were their father's sons, and they would complete what the Emperor had begun, even if doing so damned them all to become the instruments of a salvation too perfect for an imperfect galaxy to bear. In the depths of the Eye of Terror, where reality bent to the whims of chaos and time flowed like molten silver, Magnus the Red felt the disturbance ripple through the warp like a scream given form. His tower of crystalline knowledge, built from the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years of exile, trembled as psychic shockwaves crashed against its foundations. The Crimson King stood at the pinnacle of his domain, his cyclopean gaze piercing the veils between dimensions with the ease of one who had transcended mortal limitations. For millennia, he had watched the galaxy burn from his throne of bitter knowledge, content in the understanding that his father's great work crumbled without his guidance. Yet now, something had changed. The very fabric of the warp sang with revelations that struck at the heart of everything he believed about his fall from grace. "Show me," Magnus commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality shiver in response. The air before him crystallized into viewing panels, each one attuned to different currents of psychic energy flowing across the galaxy. Through these windows of will and fury, he witnessed scenes that made his immortal heart burn with emotions beyond rage. Guilliman stood in the archives of terror, handling memory crystals that contained their father's deepest thoughts. The avenging son's face bore the weight of terrible knowledge as he processed revelations that had been hidden for 10 millennia. Through the psychic resonance that clung to such profound discoveries, Magnus heard every word of the Emperor's private assessments, felt every nuance of the cosmic deception that had shaped his destiny. Sanguinius, Magnus whispered, and the name erupted from his throat like a curse that set the very air ablaze. The angel was the true choice. I was never meant to sit upon the golden throne. The tower around him groaned as his fury began to manifest in the physical realm. Books burst into flames that burned with the light of dying stars, while crystalline formations cracked under the pressure of psychic energy that had no outlet save destruction itself. Magnus had endured 10,000 years of exile, believing himself the rightful heir to his father's legacy, the son whose pride and curiosity had cost him his intended destiny. Now he understood the truth was far more devastating than mere personal failure. He had been a decoy, a distraction, a sacrifice offered willingly to the altar of misdirection, while the Emperor's true plans remained hidden from enemy eyes. The viewing crystals showed him more scenes that twisted the knife of understanding deeper into his consciousness. Guilliman revealing the truth to the blood angels, their faces reflecting the same shock that now consumed Magnus's immortal soul. Mephiston, experiencing visions of Sanguinius upon the golden throne, ruling with the perfect wisdom that Magnus had always believed should have been his. "Father," Magnus spoke to the uncaring void, his voice carrying the weight of 10 millennia's worth of accumulated betrayal. "You let me believe I was chosen. You allowed me to think my fall from grace was a tragedy worthy of the greatest stories. But it was all theatre, wasn't it? Performance art designed to hide your real intentions." The thousand-sun sorcerers who served as his court felt the psychic tremors emanating from their Primarch and wisely retreated to the tower's lower levels. They had witnessed Magnus's rage before, but this was something beyond mere anger. This was the fury of a god discovering that his entire existence had been a lie, constructed for the convenience of others. Through the warp, Magnus reached across the galaxy to touch the minds of his enemies, with invasive tendrils of psychic force. He felt Guilliman's confusion and growing determination, sensed the blood angels' mixture of reverence and terror as they processed their Primarch's intended destiny. Yet it was the echo of his father's thoughts, preserved in those memory crystals, that cut deepest. Magnus possesses the raw power, but lacks the temperamental stability required for millennial service. His pride and curiosity make him vulnerable to corruption, yet these same traits make him eager to claim any role offered. He would accept the throne gladly, seeing it as validation of his superiority over his brothers. The words, written in their father's hand and sealed away for 10,000 years, struck Magnus with the force of a collapsing star. Every assumption he had made about his relationship with the Emperor crumbled like sandcastles before a tsunami of absolute truth. He had not been the favorite son struggling with dangerous knowledge. He had been the expendable one, marked from the beginning as acceptable collateral in a game far larger than his individual fate. "Acceptable," Magnus repeated, his voice distorting as demonic energy coursed through his vocal cords. "I was acceptable. Not chosen, not beloved, not even truly wanted. Simply acceptable." The tower exploded outward as his fury reached critical mass, crystalline walls shattering into fragments that cut through dimensions like shards of frozen time. The psychic shockwave rippled across the Eye of Terror, causing demon princes to flee their domains and mortal cultists to collapse in seizures of prophetic terror. Magnus rose from the ruins of his sanctum, his form blazing with energies that made the warp itself recoil in recognition. Yet beneath the rage, a different emotion took root in his consciousness. Not the hot fury of immediate betrayal, but the cold calculation of one who finally understood the true scope of the game being played around him. If he had been designated as acceptable sacrifice, if his rebellion had been factored into the Emperor's plans from the beginning, then perhaps it was time to exceed those expectations. "Sanguinius," Magnus spoke the name again. But this time it carried different harmonics. Not curse, but contemplation. Not fury, but focus. The perfect son. The noble angel. The one truly meant for the golden throne. Through the shattered remnants of his viewing crystals, Magnus watched as events continued to unfold on distant Baal. He saw Mephiston communing with the Sanguinor, witnessed the growing understanding among the blood angels that their gene father's destiny remained unfulfilled. Most importantly, he sensed the currents of possibility flowing around Guilliman's determination to restore Sanguinius to his intended purpose. "But the angel is dead," Magnus murmured, his cyclopean eye focusing on possibilities that stretched across time and space. Dead for 10,000 years, his essence scattered across the warp like seeds on barren ground. Yet Guilliman believes restoration is possible, and Cole possesses technologies that border on the heretical. The Crimson King descended from his ruined tower to the laboratories, where he conducted his most dangerous experiments. Here, surrounded by artifacts that predated the Imperium and knowledge that had cost the sanity of lesser minds, Magnus began to plan not for revenge, but for something far more devastating to his father's legacy. If Sanguinius was meant to rule from the Golden Throne, Magnus said to the empty air, his words carrying the finality of a death sentence, then perhaps it is time to ensure he receives exactly what he was intended to inherit. But not as the Emperor's perfect servant, as my gift to the galaxy that discarded me. The implications of his plotting sent tremors through the warp that would be felt across a dozen sectors. Magnus the Red, master of the forbidden arts, keeper of secrets that could unmake reality itself, had decided to complete his father's plan. Yet the completion he envisioned would be so twisted from its original purpose that even the Chaos Gods themselves might pause in recognition of its terrible elegance. He would restore Sanguinius to the Golden Throne, but the angel who returned would serve not the Emperor's vision of order, but Magnus's understanding of the truth that lay beneath all noble lies. The perfect son would become the perfect ruler, but perfection itself would be redefined in ways that honored neither loyalty nor rebellion, but the deeper truths that existed beyond such simple concepts. "Let Guilliman pursue his restoration," Magnus whispered, as demonic energies coalesced around his form. "Let the blood angels dream of their father's return. I will ensure they receive exactly what they seek, and in doing so, I will give the galaxy the ruler it truly deserves." The laughter that erupted from the Crimson King's throat carried harmonics that made reality itself weep in anticipation of the horrors to come. Magnus the Red had found his purpose at last, not as his father's chosen heir or as Chaos's willing servant, but as the architect of a destiny so perfect in its corruption that it would serve as fitting monument to 10,000 years of accumulated betrayal and broken dreams. Across the galaxy, something stirred in response to truth unveiled. On 1,000 battlefields where the sons of Sanguinius shed their blood in the Emperor's name, the air itself began to thrum with energies that transcended the merely physical. The psychic revelation that had shaken the foundations of Baal sent ripples through the warp that touched every world where blood angels drew breath, awakening something that had slumbered in the spaces between reality. Brother Sergeant Custer of the 5th Company felt it first during the siege of Mordian Hive. His squad had been pinned by heretic fire for 6 hours, their ammunition running low and their position growing more desperate with each passing moment. The black rage tugged at the edges of his consciousness, promising the familiar fury that would either grant victory or glorious death in service to their fallen Primarch. Yet when the madness came, it carried visions unlike any he had experienced before. Instead of the familiar scenes of Horus's betrayal aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Castor saw golden light streaming from a throne that stretched beyond his ability to comprehend. Sanguinius sat in majesty, his wings spread wide as psychic energy flowed from his consciousness to encompass the stars themselves. "My sons," a voice spoke from within the vision, musical and perfect as starlight given form. "You were never meant to rage against my death alone. You were meant to rejoice in my eternal service." The Sanguinor materialized beside Castor, with a solidity that made the veteran sergeant's enhanced senses reel in recognition. This was not the fleeting apparition that had appeared to blood angels throughout their history, offering brief inspiration before fading back into legend. This entity blazed with power that made the air shimmer like heated metal, its golden armor reflecting light that seemed to come from dimensions beyond the physical realm. "The truth has been revealed," the Sanguinor spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Castor's very bones. "The plan that shaped my creation, the destiny that was denied fulfillment, the purpose that transforms suffering into service. You need no longer rage against the past, brother. You can embrace the future that still awaits." Similar manifestations erupted across the galaxy, wherever blood angels fought and bled in the Emperor's name. On the fortress world of Cretacia, Captain Sendini watched in awe as the Sanguinor appeared to his entire company during their darkest hour, leading a charge that shattered the Orc siege lines with power that defied tactical understanding. The angelic figure spoke not of vengeance for past wrongs, but of preparation for a destiny that transcended individual battles. In the Ghoul Stars, where Chaplain Moriar led a strike force against the nightmare creatures that haunted the galactic rim, the Sanguinor manifested with such intensity that the warp predators fled before its radiance. The entity shared visions of the Great Crusade that none of the assembled Marines had ever witnessed, memories of Sanguinius, planning not just for conquest, but for the eternal governance that would follow. "I foresaw this moment," the Sanguinor explained, as Xenos horrors scattered before its presence. "Not just my death upon Horus's claws, but the revelation that would come 10,000 years hence. The truth about my intended purpose was always meant to be unveiled when the Imperium's need grew desperate enough to justify terrible choices." Brother Librarian Ramunas, fighting alongside the Ultramarines on the embattled world of Quintan, experienced the most profound manifestation of all. The Sanguinor appeared to him not on the battlefield, but in the depths of psychic communion, sharing fragments of memory that belonged to Sanguinius himself. Through these visions, Ramunas witnessed private conversations between the angel and the Emperor, moments of terrible intimacy where the fate of humanity hung in the balance between love and duty. He saw Sanguinius's perfect prescience in action, watched as the Primarch foresaw not just immediate tactical concerns, but strategic patterns that stretched across centuries. "The Golden Throne was designed for me," Sanguinius spoke through the Sanguinor's manifestation, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic truth. "Not as punishment, but as apotheosis. Every vision I experienced, every moment of foresight that saved lives or prevented disasters, was preparation for the role I would play as humanity's eternal guardian." The vision shifted, showing Ramunas technical specifications that existed nowhere in Imperial records. The Golden Throne's psychic amplification systems, designed not merely to contain the Emperor's vast power, but to enhance and focus the more subtle abilities of his intended successor. Sanguinius's foresight, channeled through the throne's galaxy-spanning network, would have given the Imperium perfect strategic awareness. "Your father chose love over duty when he allowed me to die," the Sanguinor continued, its form becoming more solid with each word. "He could not bear to condemn his most beloved son to eternal service, even if that service would have saved billions of lives. Yet love and duty need not be enemies, if the choice is made freely rather than imposed by necessity." Across a dozen sectors, blood angels who had spent their entire lives struggling against the Black Rage found themselves experiencing something unprecedented. Instead of the familiar fury that drove them toward death or madness, they felt a different kind of calling. The same genetic imperatives that had once manifested as destructive rage now pulled them toward a more profound purpose. On the plague world of Nurth 7, an entire death company that had been presumed lost to madness suddenly emerged from the toxic wastelands, their black armor gleaming with inner light. They moved with perfect coordination, no longer driven by random fury, but guided by a purpose that transcended individual consciousness. At their head walked a figure that bore the face of their lost chaplain Grimaldus, yet spoke with the voice of their Gene Father himself. The rage was never madness, this transformed warrior explained to the stunned Imperial forces who witnessed their return. It was the echo of destiny calling across 10,000 years of separation. Now that the truth has been revealed, we can answer that call with clarity instead of confusion. Similar transformations occurred wherever the Sanguinor manifested with its newfound power. Blood angels who had teetered on the edge of the black rage found themselves instead filled with visions of golden purpose. They saw not their Primarch's death, but his intended life, millennia of service from the Golden Throne, guiding humanity with perfect wisdom through the darkness between stars. The psychic network that connected all sons of Sanguinius began to resonate with new frequencies. Apothecaries monitoring gene seed purity reported unprecedented readings as the biological legacy of their Primarch responded to truths that had been hidden for 10 millennia. The red thirst diminished in intensity, replaced by a different kind of hunger, not for blood, but for purpose. On the monastery world of Sanguisuga, ancient Dante felt the transformation most keenly of all. 17 centuries of accumulated weariness fell away like discarded chains as the Sanguinor manifested in the chapter's most sacred shrine. The entity that appeared bore his Primarch's face without disguise, speaking with the authority of one who had shaped the destiny of worlds. "My most faithful son," Sanguinius spoke through the Sanguinor's golden form, his voice carrying love that transcended death itself. "You have carried my burden for far longer than any mortal soul should bear. Yet your sacrifice was not meaningless, and your vigil approaches its end." "My lord," Dante whispered, falling to his knees before the radiant figure. "We have served as best we could, but the Imperium grows darker with each passing century. Without your guidance, without my guidance, you have become everything I hoped my sons would be," Sanguinius interrupted, his wings spreading to encompass the shrine in golden light. "Noble, selfless, willing to sacrifice everything for those who cannot protect themselves. Yet the time has come to move beyond mere service toward the fulfillment of deeper purpose." The vision expanded, showing Dante the same images that had appeared to Mephiston in the Chamber of Echoes, the Imperium as it was meant to exist, guided by perfect foresight and sustained by wisdom that transcended mortal limitations. Yet this time, the vision carried additional context, the understanding that such a future remained possible if the Blood Angels proved willing to pay the price for its realization. "The choice approaches," the Sanguinor warned, its form beginning to flicker as the vision reached its crescendo. "Guilliman carries knowledge that could restore me to my intended purpose, but restoration comes with costs that must be willingly accepted. My sons must choose. Allow the Imperium to continue its slow decay, or complete the plan that was begun before any of you drew breath." As the manifestations faded across the galaxy, they left behind blood angels who were fundamentally changed by what they had witnessed. The curse that had defined their chapter for 10 millennia had been revealed not as flaw, but as preparation, not as punishment, but as the genetic foundation for a destiny that still awaited fulfillment. Yet with understanding came the weight of terrible choice. They could restore their Primarch to his intended role, but doing so would condemn him to eternal servitude on the Golden Throne. The same love that had moved the Emperor to spare Sanguinius such a fate now fell to his sons to either honor or betray, depending on which path they chose to call righteousness. In the silence that followed the Sanguinor's galaxy-wide manifestation, every blood angel understood that they stood at a crossroads that would define not just their chapter's future, but the ultimate fate of humanity itself. The perfect plan was within reach, but perfection itself had proven to be a burden too terrible for even gods to bear willingly. The golden throne trembled for the first time in 10,000 years. Deep within the heart of the imperial palace, where the master of mankind had sat in eternal vigil since the heresy's end, something stirred that transcended the mechanical rhythms of life support and psychic amplification. The vast machinery that sustained the emperor's failing form registered fluctuations that had not been recorded since the dark days when Malcador the Sigillite had briefly taken his place. Guilliman felt the summons as he stood in the observatory of his flagship, watching the stars wheel in their ancient patterns above the throne world. The psychic call struck his consciousness like lightning from a clear sky, carrying harmonics that made his Primarch physiology respond with recognition deeper than memory. This was not the diffuse emanation of divine will that occasionally touched the minds of the faithful. This was direct communication from a source that had shaped the very atoms of his being. "My son." The words formed in Guilliman's mind without sound, yet carried the weight of absolute authority. "Come to me. The truth you have uncovered demands acknowledgement, and the choices ahead require understanding that only I can provide." The journey to the throne room felt longer than the crossing of star systems. Guilliman walked through corridors that had witnessed the birth and near death of human civilization, past guardians whose duty had remained unchanged for 10 millennia. The custodians who flanked the final approach to their master's presence moved with the reverence reserved for moments that would reshape history. The massive doors of the throne room opened with ponderous grace, revealing the sight that had dominated the nightmares of humanity's enemies and the prayers of its faithful since the Great Crusade's end. The Emperor sat upon the golden throne in majesty and terrible decay, his form more skeleton than flesh, sustained by technologies that married the sublime with the horrific. Psychic energy crackled around the throne in patterns that hurt mortal minds to observe, while the machinery of governance hummed with rhythms that matched the heartbeat of an empire. Yet as Guilliman approached the base of the throne, he sensed something different in the air. The usual overwhelming presence of divinity, tempered by suffering, had been replaced by something more focused, more immediate. The Emperor's consciousness, usually dispersed across the galaxy in a million different tasks, had gathered itself into singular purpose. "You have learned the truth about Sanguinius." The Emperor's voice resonated, not through the air, but directly into Guilliman's mind, carrying emotions too complex for mortal language to express. Malcador's message has fulfilled its purpose after 10 millennia of patient waiting. Guilliman fell to one knee before the throne, not in ceremony, but in genuine awe at this unprecedented moment of direct communication. "Father, I have indeed learned what was hidden. The angel was your true choice for this burden, not Magnus as we all believed." "Magnus was never more than a contingency," the Emperor confirmed, his psychic voice carrying undertones of profound regret. The Red King's pride made him useful as misdirection, but his temperament was fundamentally unsuited for millennial service. His fall to chaos, while tragic, was anticipated and ultimately irrelevant to my deeper plans. The admission struck Guilliman with the force of revelation. Even Magnus's corruption had been factored into his father's calculations, one more variable in equations too vast for normal minds to process. Yet beneath the cold logic of such planning, Guilliman sensed deeper currents of emotion that spoke to motivations beyond mere strategic necessity. "Then why?" Guilliman asked, his voice barely above a whisper in the presence of such overwhelming truth. "Why allow Sanguinius to die if he was so crucial to your design? Why sacrifice the perfect future for the flawed present we inhabit?" The Emperor's response came not as words, but as a flood of images that crashed over Guilliman's consciousness like a psychic tsunami. He witnessed the final moments aboard the vengeful spirit from his father's perspective, felt the Emperor's anguish as he chose between love and duty in the space of a single heartbeat. Sanguinius lay broken at Horus's feet, his perfect form marred by wounds that would have slain any lesser being. Yet the angel still lived, his breath coming in ragged gasps as his foresight showed him visions of the choice that awaited: the golden throne or death, eternal service or final rest. "Father," Sanguinius whispered as the Emperor arrived to face the War Master, his voice carrying the musical quality that had inspired loyalty in billions. "I know what you intended for me. I have always known." The Emperor knelt beside his dying son, his presence blazing with power that could have healed any wound, restored any damage. Yet Sanguinius's injuries were not merely physical. They were psychic, spiritual, designed by Horus's malice to present an impossible choice: heal the angel and claim him for the throne, or allow him the dignity of death as a free being. "You were meant for greatness beyond imagination," the Emperor said, his voice breaking with love that transcended mortal understanding. "To guide humanity through 10,000 years of darkness, to be the perfect ruler I could never become." Sanguinius smiled despite his pain, his wings rustling with the effort of movement. "I know, Father. Just as I know that such greatness would be indistinguishable from the most perfect slavery ever devised. I would be humanity's guardian angel, but I would never again be truly myself." The vision continued, showing Guilliman the impossible weight of that moment. The Emperor possessed the power to preserve Sanguinius, to bind him to the Golden Throne and secure humanity's future for millennia to come. Yet doing so would require overriding the angel's free will, transforming the most noble of his sons into a willing prisoner of destiny. "I chose love over duty," the Emperor's psychic voice admitted, carrying the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated regret. "I could not condemn my most beloved son to eternal servitude, even if that servitude would have saved countless lives. I allowed him to die free rather than live as a perfect slave." The admission struck Guilliman like a physical blow. His father, the master of mankind, who had sacrificed everything for the survival of the human species, had chosen personal love over the greater good when the moment of ultimate decision arrived. The perfect plan had been within reach, requiring only the will to impose it upon an unwilling subject. "But Sanguinius accepted his intended role willingly, in the end," Guilliman protested, remembering the visions shared by the Sanguinor. "He understood the necessity, embraced the purpose." "He accepted the concept in theory," the Emperor corrected, his consciousness sharing memories that cut deeper than any blade. Yet when faced with the reality of eternal bondage, he chose death over duty. Not from cowardice, but from the recognition that even the most noble servitude is still servitude. He preferred to die as himself, rather than live as humanity's perfect guardian. The vision shifted, showing Guilliman the moment when his father's choice crystallized into action. The Emperor could have saved Sanguinius, could have bound him to the throne through love or duty or simple genetic compulsion. Instead, he chose to honor his son's implicit wish for freedom, even if that freedom came at the cost of death. "I took his place upon the throne, not because I was the intended occupant, but because someone had to fulfill the role I had designed for another," the Emperor continued, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic sacrifice. "For 10,000 years, I have sat where Sanguinius should have ruled, sustained by machinery, where he would have drawn strength from purpose itself." Guilliman absorbed this revelation in stunned silence, understanding finally the true scope of his father's sacrifice. The Emperor had not claimed the Golden Throne through divine right or necessity, but through love manifest as the ultimate act of paternal protection. He had condemned himself to eternal suffering to spare his son the burden of eternal service. Yet the plan was not abandoned, merely delayed. The Emperor's psychic voice carried new harmonics as it built toward revelation that would reshape Guilliman's understanding of current events. The sanguinor that manifests to the blood angels is not merely legend or psychic echo. It is the fragment of Sanguinius's soul that understood its intended destiny and has spent 10 millennia preparing for restoration. The implications crashed over Guilliman, like a tide of possibility and terror combined. The Emperor's perfect plan was not lost, merely waiting for the right moment and the willing participants to see it completed. Yet completion would still require the same terrible choice that had torn his father's heart 10,000 years ago. The choice approaches once more, the Emperor warned, his consciousness beginning to withdraw as the effort of such focused communication took its toll on his failing form. Technologies exist that could restore Sanguinius to fulfill his intended purpose, but the same questions of love versus duty remain. Will you choose the greater good over individual freedom, or will you follow my example and honor love above necessity? As the Emperor's direct presence faded back into the diffuse emanation that sustained the Imperium's daily functions, Guilliman understood that he now faced the same impossible decision that had haunted his father for 10 millennia. The power to restore Sanguinius lay within reach, but using that power would mean condemning his beloved brother to the eternal servitude their father had been unwilling to impose. The Golden Throne hummed with renewed energy as the Emperor's consciousness dispersed once more across the galaxy, leaving Guilliman alone with knowledge that felt too vast for any single mind to contain. The truth about Sanguinius's destiny was no longer hidden, but that truth came with choices that would test the very foundations of what it meant to love someone more than duty itself. In the silence that followed divine communication, Guilliman knelt before the Golden Throne and wept for the first time since his awakening, understanding finally the impossible burden that came with the power to shape destinies. Love and duty need not be enemies, but when they came into conflict, even gods found themselves choosing between salvation and damnation, between perfect futures and imperfect freedoms. The choice that would define the next 10,000 years of human history lay before him, and Guilliman finally understood why his father had chosen love over logic when faced with the same terrible decision 10 millennia ago. Reality shuddered as truth unveiled rippled across the galaxy like shock waves from a collapsing star. The revelation that had passed between the Emperor and his son on Terra sent psychic tremors through the warp that touched every corner of human space, carrying with it the weight of destinies denied and purposes unfulfilled. What had been hidden for 10,000 years could not be exposed without consequence, and the universe itself began to writhe in response to knowledge too vast for mortal minds to safely contain. The first warp storms manifested in the segmentum solar itself, great spiraling maelstroms of psychic energy that erupted from seemingly empty space, like wounds torn in reality's fabric. Navigator houses reported unprecedented disturbances in the currents they used to guide ships between stars, while astropathic choirs across a dozen systems fell silent as their members collapsed in seizures of prophetic ecstasy. On Macraga, Chief Librarian Tegurius awakened from meditation, with blood streaming from his eyes, his consciousness flooded with visions that defied rational interpretation. He saw the Golden Throne not as it existed in the present, but as it had been intended to function, a nexus of perfect prescience that could have guided humanity through 10 millennia of darkness with wisdom instead of desperate faith. "The pattern shifts," Tegurius gasped to his assembled battle brothers, his voice distorting as psychic energy coursed through his vocal cords. Something fundamental has changed in the galaxy's spiritual architecture. The warp itself recognizes truth long suppressed, and reality adjusts to accommodate revelation. Similar manifestations occurred across the Imperium as the psychic aftershocks of divine communication spread like ripples in an infinite pond. On Titan, the Grey Knights felt their Aegis wards flicker as energies they could not classify pressed against their sanctified barriers. Brother Captain Stern reported to his superiors that the very nature of chaos seemed to be evolving, feeding on secrets unveiled rather than merely corruption spread. In the eye of terror, the daemon princes of Sinch felt the disturbance like nectar upon their tongues. The changer of ways had always drawn power from secrets revealed and plans set in motion, yet this revelation carried flavors that even the architect of fate had not tasted for 10,000 years. Ancient schemes that had lain dormant since the heresy's end suddenly blazed with renewed possibility. "Glorious," whispered Ahriman, as he felt the psychic tsunami crash over his tower on the planet of the sorcerers. A secret so profound that its revelation reshapes the very foundations of reality. The angel's hidden destiny, the emperor's buried shame, the truth that could have prevented everything we have endured. The thousand-sun sorcerer reached out with senses honed by millennia of forbidden study, tasting the psychic emanations that carried across the galaxy like smoke from a burning library. Through these currents, he witnessed scenes of impossible beauty and terror. Sanguinius upon the golden throne in majesty eternal, the blood angels transformed from warriors into shepherds, the Imperium guided by perfect foresight rather than desperate faith. Yet even as Ahriman savored the revelation's implications, he sensed something else stirring in the warp's depths. His patron, Magnus the Red, had not remained idle while these cosmic truths unfurled across the galaxy. The Crimson King's fury at being revealed as mere decoy had crystallized into purpose far more dangerous than simple revenge. Across the galaxy, the Blood Angels felt the psychic tremors most keenly of all. Their gene seed, already awakened by the Sanguinor's manifestations, responded to the unveiled truth with changes that transcended biology itself. Chapter Masters reported that brothers who had struggled with the Black Rage for decades suddenly found themselves filled with visions of golden purpose instead of crimson fury. On the fortress world of Baal Secundus, Captain Erasmus Tycho experienced the transformation firsthand. The rage that had simmered in his veins since his wounding at Armageddon suddenly shifted, becoming not destructive fury, but constructive yearning. He saw himself not charging toward glorious death, but standing vigil beside a throne of gold, while his gene father guided humanity through the darkness between stars. "Brothers," Tycho announced to his assembled company, his scarred features radiant with understanding that transcended mere knowledge. "We have been servants long enough. The time has come to claim our inheritance as sons of destiny itself." The psychic resonance that connected all of Sanguinius's descendants began to pulse with new rhythms, drawing them inexorably toward terror like iron filings pulled by an impossibly vast magnet. Blood angels across the galaxy felt the same compulsion, not mere duty calling them to serve, but genetic destiny demanding fulfillment of purposes written into their very souls. Ancient psychers throughout the Imperium, those whose minds had been touched by the Emperor's light during the Great Crusade itself, began receiving visions that defied their accumulated wisdom. Astropath Prime, Korath of the Validus sector, witnessed scenes of the angel ruling from the golden throne, while wings of psychic energy encompassed entire star systems. The visions carried such weight of reality that he questioned whether he was experiencing prophecy or memory of futures that should have been. "I see him," Korath whispered to his assembled choir, his ancient voice cracking with the strain of channeling such profound imagery. "The perfect son, crowned in duty and terrible purpose. This is not what will be, but what was always meant to be. The galaxy recognizes the pattern, and reality itself yearns for correction." The warp storms continued to spread, following ley lines of psychic energy that connected every world where humanity dwelt. On Cardia, before its destruction, Castellan Creed had reported similar disturbances, reality itself seeming to bend toward configurations that honored hidden truths rather than accepted lies. Now, in the wake of that world's fall, the psychic emanations found new channels through which to flow. Navigator House Belisarius reported that the warp routes themselves were shifting, currents that had remained stable for millennia, suddenly flowing toward Terra, with purposes that transcended mere gravitational attraction. Ancient pathways sealed since the heresy began opening once more, as if the galaxy's spiritual architecture was preparing for changes that mortal minds could not yet comprehend. In the deepest vaults of Mars, Archmagos Belisarius Caul felt his cogitators strain to process readings that defied established parameters. The Omnissiah's will seemed to pulse through every circuit and sacred mechanism, carrying imperatives that spoke of restoration rather than mere maintenance. Technologies that had remained dormant for 10,000 years suddenly hummed with awakening power, responding to psychic frequencies that matched patterns he had discovered in Malcador's sealed vault. "Fascinating," Cole murmured, as his mechadendrites danced across control surfaces that blazed with renewed purpose. The revelation creates its own imperatives. Truth unveiled does not merely inform, it demands action commensurate with its significance. Yet beneath the awe and wonder that accompanied such cosmic revelation, darker currents stirred in the warp's depths. The ruinous powers had learned long ago to feed on humanity's strongest emotions, and few emotions burned brighter than the recognition of destiny denied. What had been hidden for 10 millennia had been suppressed not merely through secrecy, but through the active will of powers that benefited from humanity's spiritual confusion. Nurgle felt the disturbance as a threat to the stagnation he cherished, while Khorne raged at revelations that might reduce the galaxy's eternal warfare. Slaanesh sensed possibilities for corruption in the perfection that Sanguinius's restoration might represent. Yet it was Tzeentch who smiled most broadly, recognizing in these unfolding events the culmination of schemes that stretched back to the heresy itself. The Changer of Ways had always known that truth suppressed would eventually demand expression, and the magnitude of this particular revelation promised changes that would reshape the galaxy's fundamental nature. Whether those changes served chaos or order remained to be seen. But Tzeentch had learned long ago that transformation itself was more precious than any particular outcome. As the warp storms reached their crescendo, touching every corner of human space with their promise of change and revelation, the Imperium found itself balanced on the knife's edge of destiny. The truth about Sanguinius's intended purpose had been revealed, but truth alone was not enough. Action was required. Choices that would either fulfill the Emperor's perfect plan or damn the galaxy to consequences beyond imagination. In the growing darkness between stars, reality itself held its breath, waiting to see whether humanity would prove wise enough to claim its intended destiny or foolish enough to repeat the mistakes that had haunted them for 10,000 years of slow decay. The warp storms continued to spread, carrying with them the weight of cosmic possibility and the promise that whatever came next would eclipse everything that had come before. The knowledge that had shattered across the galaxy, like glass from a broken window, now demanded response beyond mere understanding. Guilliman stood in the deepest laboratories of the Imperial Palace, surrounded by technologies that married the sublime achievements of the Dark Age with innovations that bordered on heresy itself. Here, in chambers that existed beneath even the sealed vaults where Malcador's message had waited, Belisarius Caul had assembled the components of possibility itself. "It can be done," Caul announced, with the certainty that only 10 millennia of accumulated knowledge could provide. His mechadendrites danced across control surfaces that hummed with barely contained power, while servo skulls circled overhead like mechanical angels bearing witness to the moment when theory became terrible reality. The Archmagos gestured toward a construction that defied easy description, its crystalline matrices and psychic resonance chambers forming patterns that hurt mortal eyes to observe directly. Yet Guilliman recognized the core design from his father's private archives, a resurrection matrix that could restore life to patterns preserved in the warp itself, given sufficient genetic material and psychic resonance to guide the process. The Sanguinor is not merely legend or psychic echo, Cowell continued, his synthesized voice carrying harmonics of excitement and dread combined. It is your brother's essence, preserved in the immaterium and stabilized by 10,000 years of worship from his sons. With this construct, I can use that essence as a template to restore Sanguinius to physical existence. Guilliman felt his twin hearts beat in perfect synchronization as the implications crashed over him like a psychic tsunami. The power to restore his most beloved brother lay before him, contained within mechanisms that represented the pinnacle of imperial technology, wedded to arts that scraped the boundaries of forbidden knowledge. Yet restoration is not resurrection, Cowell warned, his optical mechadendrites focusing on the Primarch with mechanical precision. What returns will carry all of Sanguinius's memories, his personality, his noble spirit. But it will also carry the full knowledge of why he chose death over duty 10,000 years ago. The question becomes whether such a being can be compelled to accept what he once died to avoid. The moral weight of that statement settled upon Guilliman's shoulders like a lead cloak. To restore Sanguinius would be to present him with the same choice that had torn their father's heart: accept eternal servitude on the Golden Throne, or watch humanity continue its slow decline into extinction. Yet this time, the choice would be presented not by loving duty, but by familial manipulation. What materials would such a process require? Guilliman asked, though he dreaded the answer. Cole's response confirmed his worst fears. Genetic material from Sanguinius's direct lineage, not just gene seed, but the living essence of his sons. The Blood Angels would need to contribute not merely samples, but significant portions of their biological legacy. Many would not survive the extraction process. The laboratory fell silent, except for the soft hum of machinery and the distant vibrations of the palace's vast infrastructure. Guilliman understood that they spoke not of mere technical requirements, but of sacrifice that would echo across centuries. The Blood Angels would need to give their lives not in battle, but in the cold calculation of resurrection protocols. A soft chime announced the arrival of another presence in the laboratory's sanctum. Chapter Master Dante materialized from the transport platform, his ancient armor gleaming despite the weight of 17 centuries of warfare. The death mask of Sanguinius covered his features, but his bearing spoke of resolution that transcended mortal uncertainty. Lord Guilliman, Dante's voice carried the authority of one who had commanded the loyalty of warriors for longer than most civilizations had existed. I have come at your summons, though I suspect I know what you would ask of me and my brothers. You have heard Cowell's assessment, Guilliman replied, his voice heavy with the weight of impending decision. The technology exists to restore Sanguinius, but the cost would be gladly paid, Dante interrupted, removing his death mask to reveal features marked by centuries of service, yet blazing with renewed purpose. My lord, we have carried the burden of our father's denied destiny for 10,000 years. Every brother lost to the Black Rage, every warrior consumed by the Red Thirst, every moment of suffering we have endured, all of it was preparation for this moment. The chapter master stepped toward the resurrection matrix, his enhanced senses analyzing the complex mechanisms that could restore his gene father to life and purpose. The Blood Angels do not fear death in service to the Emperor. We fear meaningless death, death that serves no purpose beyond ending existence. But to die that our Primarch might live, to sacrifice our mortal forms that he might accept his intended destiny, such death would be the culmination of everything we were created to achieve. Cowell's optical arrays swiveled to focus on both Primarch and Chapter Master. The process would require the willing participation of at least 300 Blood Angels, their genetic legacy distilled and refined through techniques that have never been attempted on such a scale. The survivors would be fundamentally changed, their connection to Sanguinius's essence permanently altered. "And those who do not survive?" Guilliman asked, though he already knew the answer would cut him to his core. "Would die in agony beyond description," Cowell admitted with the brutal honesty that only machines could provide. The extraction process would consume them from within, their life force becoming the foundation upon which their Primarch's restoration is built. Yet they would die knowing that their sacrifice served the greatest purpose imaginable. Dante's response carried the finality of a death sentence and the promise of resurrection combined. "My lord, I have lived for 17 centuries, waiting for a death worthy of the life I have been granted. To die in service to my Gene Father's restoration, to know that my essence would become part of the foundation for humanity's salvation, I can imagine no more glorious end." The chapter master turned to face Guilliman directly, his ancient features radiant with understanding that transcended mere duty. "The choice is not whether we will sacrifice ourselves for this purpose. The choice is whether you will accept our willing sacrifice to achieve what your father could not bring himself to demand." Guilliman staggered as the full weight of the decision crashed over him. Here stood the same moral crossroads that had destroyed his father's perfect plan, the same choice between love and duty that had haunted the Emperor for 10,000 years. Yet this time, the subjects of that choice offered themselves willingly, understanding fully the price and the purpose of their sacrifice. But Sanguinius himself chose death over such servitude, Guilliman protested, his voice breaking with emotions too complex for words to express. "How can we condemn him to accept what he died to avoid? How can we claim the moral authority to override his choice?" Dante's smile carried the weight of wisdom accumulated over centuries of command. "Because, my lord, we know something that Sanguinius did not when he made his choice. We know the cost of his absence, the price that humanity has paid for his noble refusal. 10,000 years of darkness, of slow decay, of desperate faith where perfect wisdom should have guided us." The chapter master gestured toward the laboratory's walls, where hololithic displays showed the current state of the Imperium, a realm besieged on all sides, sustained more by will than wisdom, surviving through faith where foresight should have provided certainty. "Our father chose death to preserve his freedom, and we honor that choice," Dante continued. "Yet we also understand that freedom means nothing if those you love suffer in your absence. Perhaps it is time to present him, not with compulsion, but with complete knowledge of what his continued absence costs the species he was created to serve." Guilliman absorbed these words in silence, understanding that the Blood Angels offered him not just the technical means to restore Sanguinius, but the moral framework to justify such restoration. They would die willingly so that their Gene Father might live reluctantly, but live nonetheless in service to purposes greater than individual desire. "The process could begin within days," Cowell announced, his mechanical precision cutting through the emotional weight of the moment. "Yet once initiated, it cannot be stopped or reversed. The choice must be made with full understanding of its consequences, not just for Sanguinius, but for the galaxy itself." The Archmagus paused, his optical mechadendrites focusing on something beyond the physical realm. "Yet I must warn you, Lord Guilliman. Others have sensed the potential for such restoration. Magnus the Red stirs in the eye of terror, his interest in these proceedings far from benevolent. Whatever choice you make, you must make it quickly, before intervention renders all choices meaningless." In the silence that followed this warning, Guilliman felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a mantle woven from the hopes and fears of countless billions. The power to complete his father's perfect plan lay within reach, but using that power would require him to become what the Emperor had refused to be, a being willing to impose salvation upon those who would choose freedom over service. The choice that would define the next 10,000 years of human history stretched before him, and Guilliman finally understood why even gods hesitated when faced with decisions that balanced love against duty on scales too vast for mortal comprehension to fully grasp. The moment of decision crystallized into action with the finality of a star's death. In the deepest chambers beneath the imperial palace, where the boundary between science and heresy dissolved into necessity, 300 blood angels knelt in perfect formation around Cole's resurrection matrix. Each warrior bore the gene legacy of Sanguinius in his veins, and each had volunteered to surrender that legacy so that their Primarch might live again. Chapter Master Dante stood at the formation's heart, his ancient armor removed to reveal flesh marked by 17 centuries of war and service. Around him, his battle brothers had likewise stripped away the trappings of their rank and station, becoming not space marines, but vessels through which their gene father's essence might flow back into the material realm. "My sons," Dante spoke to the assembled warriors, his voice carrying the weight of final benediction. "We go to our Father not as failures seeking redemption, but as offerings freely given. Let our deaths purchase his return, and let his return purchase humanity's salvation." Cole's resurrection matrix hummed with barely contained power as exotic energies flowed through crystalline conduits that seemed to bend space around their configurations. The Archmagos moved between control surfaces with mechanical precision, his every gesture calibrated to channel forces that could remake reality itself. Yet for all his technological mastery, success depended not on machinery, but on sacrifice willingly offered. "Beginning genetic extraction," Carl announced, his synthesized voice cutting through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. "Brothers of Sanguinius, know that your pain serves purposes beyond mortal understanding." The first phase struck the blood angels like lightning, channeled through their very souls. Each warrior felt his gene seed responding to frequencies that transcended the merely physical, their biological legacy being drawn from flesh and bone through processes that married science with something approaching divinity. The pain was beyond description, yet not one of the assembled warriors cried out or showed weakness. Through their shared agony, they felt something else, the presence of their gene father stirring in response to their sacrifice. The Sanguinor, which had appeared to blood angels across the galaxy for 10 millennia, began to manifest with solidity that made reality itself tremble in recognition. Guilliman watched from the chamber's perimeter, his enhanced senses recording every detail of the process, while his heart broke at the sight of such willing sacrifice. 300 of the Imperium's finest warriors were dying in agony, so that one perfect being might return to life and purpose. The mathematical efficiency of the exchange horrified him, even as its necessity demanded acceptance. The second phase began as genetic material reached critical mass within the resurrection matrix. Cowl's machinery channeled the extracted essence through patterns that had been hidden in the Emperor's deepest archives, designs that predated the Imperium itself. The Sanguinor's psychic presence provided the template, while the Blood Angel's sacrifice provided the raw material from which physical form could be reconstructed. Brother Cassiel of the Third Company was the first to fall, his life force consumed so completely that his body crumbled to dust even as his essence joined the growing pattern within the matrix. Others followed in quick succession, their deaths synchronized with mechanical precision as the resurrection process demanded ever greater sacrifice. "Hold fast," Dante whispered as his own life began to ebb, feeling the inexorable pull of the extraction process drawing his essence toward the crystalline heart of Cole's construct. "Our Father comes. I can feel his presence growing stronger with each brother's sacrifice." The matrix blazed with golden light as the accumulated genetic legacy of 300 blood angels fused with the psychic template provided by 10,000 years of faith and worship. The Sanguinor's essence, preserved in the warp since the moment of Sanguinius's death, began to coalesce into patterns that reality could support and contain. The resurrection chamber filled with energies that transcended the physical realm as form began to emerge within the Matrix's heart. First came wings of pure light, their span encompassing dimensions beyond mortal sight. Then came flesh shaped by divine will and genetic perfection, followed by features that had inspired loyalty in billions of souls across the span of the Great Crusade. Sanguinius opened his eyes for the first time in 10,000 years, and reality itself held its breath in recognition of what had been restored to existence. The angel stood within the dissipating energies of the resurrection matrix, his perfect form unmarred by the wounds that had once claimed his life. Yet his gaze carried knowledge that transcended even death itself. "My sons," Sanguinius spoke, his voice carrying the musical quality that had once turned the tide of battles through inspiration alone. Yet beneath that perfect harmony lay currents of sorrow that spoke to understanding, beyond mortal comprehension. "You have given everything so that I might return. I feel each of your sacrifices as wounds upon my soul." Dante, though dying, managed to speak through lips that cracked with the effort of maintaining consciousness. "My lord, we die gladly, knowing that you live to serve." "To serve?" Sanguinius repeated, his gaze moving from the dying chapter master to encompass Gilliman and the resurrection chamber's stark reality. "Yes, Dante, I understand now why I have been brought back, what purpose my return is meant to fulfill. The golden throne awaits its intended occupant, and I am that occupant." The angel stepped from the matrix with grace that made even Gilliman's enhanced senses struggle to track his movement. Sanguinius approached his dying sons, kneeling beside Dante as the chapter master's life flickered toward extinction. "You have served beyond any duty I could have demanded," Sanguinius whispered, his hand resting upon Dante's brow with gentleness that transcended physical touch. "Rest now, my faithful son. Your vigil is ended." Dante's final breath carried with it the weight of 17 centuries finally laid down. His ancient features, peaceful as death, claimed him in the presence of the Gene Father, for whom he had lived and died. Around the chamber, the last of the blood angels who had volunteered for this ultimate sacrifice followed their chapter master into darkness, their essence having been given freely to purchase their Primarch's return. Sanguinius rose from beside Dante's body, his perfect features marked by grief that encompassed not just the present loss, but the cosmic scope of what his resurrection represented. He turned to face Gilliman, and in his eyes the avenging son saw knowledge that chilled his twin hearts. "Brother," Sanguinius said, his voice carrying harmonics of love and terrible understanding combined, "I know why you chose to restore me. I know what the Emperor intended when he designed the golden throne for my use. I know what price humanity has paid for my 10,000 years of absence." Gilliman found his voice with difficulty, overwhelmed by the presence of the brother he had thought lost forever. "Sanguinius, the choice is yours to make. I will not compel you, as our father could not compel you. But the need is absolute," Sanguinius interrupted, his wings rustling with barely contained emotion. "I see it all, brother. The long war, the slow decay, the desperate faith where perfect foresight should have provided certainty. My death purchased nothing but the preservation of my own freedom, while humanity paid the price in blood and suffering across 10 millennia. The angel moved through the chamber with purposeful grace, examining Cole's resurrection matrix and the technical specifications that had made his return possible. Yet his attention focused not on machinery, but on the deeper implications of what had been accomplished. "Yet I also understand why I chose death over duty when Horus struck me down," Sanguinius continued, his voice carrying currents of revelation that made the air itself seem to shimmer with possibility. "It was not fear of servitude that motivated my choice, brother. It was love for my sons, and the knowledge that accepting the Golden Throne would have bound them to a legacy of inherited guilt. Guilliman's breath caught as deeper understanding dawned. Inherited guilt? The gene seed carries more than physical traits, Sanguinius explained, his gaze encompassing the chamber where 300 blood angels had died to purchase his resurrection. It carries psychic resonance, emotional echoes, the spiritual weight of its progenitor's choices. Had I accepted the Golden Throne willingly, every son born of my lineage would have carried the knowledge of their father's willing slavery. The angel spread his wings, their span encompassing dimensions that seemed to extend beyond the physical realm. I chose death so that my sons might serve freely, without the weight of inherited bondage shaping their souls. Yet in doing so, I condemned them to 10,000 years of suffering, the echo of destiny denied. The implications of this revelation struck Guilliman with the force of cosmic understanding. Sanguinius had not died from cowardice, or even noble refusal. He had died from love, choosing to sacrifice himself rather than burden his genetic legacy with the spiritual weight of eternal servitude. But the choice remains, Sanguinius said, his perfect features resolving into expressions of terrible determination. Accept the Golden Throne and fulfill the Emperor's design, or refuse once more, and watch humanity continue its slide toward extinction. Yet this time, the choice is made with full knowledge of its consequences. Not just for me, but for the species I was created to serve. The resurrected Primarch stood in the center of the chamber, where his sons had died to restore him, surrounded by the dust of their sacrifice and the weight of cosmic destiny. The Golden Throne awaited, humanity's future hung in the balance, and Sanguinius faced the same choice that had haunted him for 10,000 years: freedom or duty, love or service, individual will or species salvation. The angel who had been meant to guide humanity through the darkness between stars was alive again, but whether he would accept his intended purpose remained the question that would define the next age of human history. The Golden Throne rose before Sanguinius, like a monument to 10,000 years of accumulated necessity. In the vast chamber that served as humanity's beating heart, where the master of mankind had sat in eternal vigil since the heresy's end, the angel stood at the crossroads of destiny itself. The machinery that sustained the Emperor's failing form hummed with rhythms that matched the pulse of an empire, while psychic energies crackled through conduits designed to channel the will of gods. Guilliman followed at a respectful distance, understanding that this moment belonged not to strategy or politics, but to the deepest currents of love and sacrifice that flowed between father and son. The custodians who flanked the throne room's perimeter maintained their vigil in perfect silence, witnesses to a choice that would echo across the centuries yet to come. The Emperor's presence filled the chamber, not as the overwhelming force of distant divinity, but as the focused attention of a father confronting the consequences of choices made in love and desperation. His psychic voice reached across the space that separated throne from petitioner, carrying harmonics that spoke to bonds deeper than blood or duty. My perfect son. The Emperor's consciousness touched Sanguinius with gentleness that transcended physical sensation. You have returned to face the choice I could not bear to impose upon you. The Golden Throne awaits its intended occupant, yet I will not compel what I once could not demand. Sanguinius approached the base of the throne with movements that carried both reverence and terrible understanding. His wings rustled in the chamber's recycled atmosphere, while his perfect features remained composed despite the magnitude of what he contemplated. The angel who had died rather than accept eternal servitude now stood before that same servitude freely offered. Father, Sanguinius spoke aloud, his voice carrying the musical quality that had once inspired billions while acknowledging the weight of cosmic purpose. I understand now what my refusal cost. 10,000 years of darkness, where perfect foresight could have provided light. Countless billions dead who might have lived if wisdom, rather than desperate faith, had guided humanity's choices. The Emperor's response resonated with love and infinite regret combined. Yet you also understand why I could not compel your acceptance. To force duty upon unwilling hearts is to create not guardians but prisoners, and prisoners inevitably seek escape from their bonds. Sanguinius placed one perfect hand upon the golden throne's armrest, feeling the psychic resonance that flowed through mechanisms designed specifically for his consciousness. The throne responded to his touch with energies that had lain dormant for 10 millennia, systems awakening in recognition of the being they had been created to serve. "I see the pathways, Father," the angel whispered, as visions of possible futures flooded his consciousness. "Every choice that leads toward salvation, every decision that brings hope rather than despair. The foresight you intended me to wield shows me not just tactics or strategy, but the broad currents of destiny itself." Through the throne's psychic amplification systems, Sanguinius perceived the galaxy as it truly existed, not the desperate realm of failing faith that mortals inhabited, but the magnificent potential that lay waiting for wisdom to unlock its promise. He saw worlds reborn from ashes, species united in common purpose, the darkness between stars illuminated by hope instead of consumed by fear. "Yet I also see the price," Sanguinius continued, his voice carrying currents of sorrow that made the very air weep in sympathy. "Eternal vigilance, consciousness dispersed across 1,000,000 worlds, individual desire subsumed into species necessity. To accept this role is to cease being Sanguinius and become something both greater and lesser, humanity's perfect guardian." The Emperor's psychic presence intensified, carrying with it memories of their last conversation 10,000 years ago aboard the Vengeful Spirit. "I release you from any obligation, my son. The choice must be yours alone, made not from duty or compulsion, but from understanding and will. I have learned that even perfect futures are meaningless if they are built upon unwilling sacrifice." Guilliman watched as his brother contemplated the choice that would define not just his own fate, but the destiny of the human species. The weight of 10,000 years of accumulated suffering pressed upon the moment, while the promise of perfect guidance beckoned from futures that could still be claimed. "Yet love itself demands sacrifice," Sanguinius said at last, his words carrying the finality of divine judgment. "I died once to spare my sons the burden of inherited guilt, choosing my freedom over their spiritual liberation. Yet in doing so, I condemned them to 10 millennia of suffering, the echo of destiny denied." The angel moved around the golden throne, his enhanced senses analyzing the complex mechanisms that would bind his consciousness to humanity's fate. Yet his attention focused not on machinery, but on the deeper implications of willing service versus imposed duty. 300 of my sons died to restore me to life and choice," Sanguinius continued, his voice building toward revelation that would reshape the foundations of imperial doctrine. "Dante spent 17 centuries carrying burdens that should have been mine to bear. Countless brothers fell to the Black Rage, experiencing not madness, but the psychic trauma of purpose unfulfilled. The Emperor's presence carried new harmonics as understanding passed between father and son. "Then you will accept the throne?" "I will claim it," Sanguinius corrected, his perfect features resolving into expressions of terrible determination. Not as prisoner bound by necessity, but as guardian choosing service. Not because duty demands it, but because love requires it. The choice transforms everything, Father. The same action made from different motivations creates entirely different realities. The angel spread his wings one final time as a free being, their span encompassing dimensions that seemed to extend beyond the physical realm. Then, with movements that carried both sorrow and joy, he ascended the steps toward the golden throne, where 10,000 years of faithful service awaited. "I choose to serve not because I must, but because I will," Sanguinius declared, his voice carrying across the chamber with the authority of divine commitment. "Let my consciousness guide humanity, not as slave to necessity, but as shepherd choosing to tend his flock. Let my foresight illuminate the darkness, not from compulsion, but from love manifest as eternal vigilance." The golden throne responded to his approach with energies that had been building toward this moment for 10 millennia. Systems designed specifically for Sanguinius's consciousness blazed to life, while psychic amplification networks that had lain dormant since the Emperor's entombment awakened with power that made reality itself tremble in recognition. As Sanguinius settled into the throne that had been made for his spirit, the chamber filled with golden light that transcended mere illumination. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual identity, touching every corner of human space with awareness that encompassed not just present circumstances, but the vast web of possibility that stretched across centuries yet to come. "I see," the angel whispered, as perfect foresight replaced mortal perception. "Every path that leads toward hope, every choice that brings light instead of darkness. The future need not be grim, Father. It need only be guided by wisdom rather than abandoned to chance." The Emperor's failing form began to show signs of restoration as the golden throne finally received its intended occupant. Yet his psychic presence carried not relief, but profound gratitude as he felt the burden of 10,000 years beginning to lift from shoulders that had carried more than any being should bear. "Rest now, Father," Sanguinius said, his voice already carrying harmonics that resonated across dimensions. "Your vigil is ended. Let me carry the weight you have borne, not as punishment, but as privilege freely chosen." Guilliman watched in awe as the golden throne transformed from instrument of torment into tool of perfect governance. His brother's consciousness, distributed across the galaxy through psychic networks designed for such communion, began the work of guiding humanity toward futures bright with possibility rather than dark with desperation. The Angel Eternal had claimed his intended throne at last, not through compulsion or manipulation, but through choice freely made in full knowledge of its cost. Love had triumphed over duty by becoming duty, while sacrifice had transcended suffering by embracing willing service. As the light of perfect foresight blazed across the galaxy, touching every world where humans dwelt with the promise of wisdom instead of faith, the Imperium of Man stepped from its 10,000-year twilight into the dawn of an age where hope was no longer heresy, but the foundation upon which all futures would be built. The angel's wings, now spread across star systems, instead of merely physical dimensions, cast shadows that fell not as darkness, but as shelter for all who served the species he had chosen to guard. In choosing servitude, Sanguinius had claimed the ultimate freedom, the liberty to love without limitation, to serve without resentment, to sacrifice without suffering the poison of compulsion. The perfect Son had taken his perfect throne, and the galaxy would never be the same. April 17th, 2026, 7:56:25. Glob pattern, ***/*, April 17th, 2026, 7:56:29. Red, file_path, C:\\users \shadow, \desktop, \compiled binaries, \Claude code, generation 5-2, \output files, \warhammer, what if -2 hours -12c h, \video number 15, script idk, \project guide, Warhammer what if, v1.json, April 17th, 2026, 7:56:34. Rad rc file_path, C:\users \, shadow, backslash, as desktop, backslash, compiled binaries, backslash, Claude code, generation var, 2, backslash, output, files, backslash, Warhammer, what if, dash, 2 hours, dash, 12 characters, backslash. Video number 15, script IDK, backslash, titles.txt. April 17th, 2026, 7:56:44. Tool search. Query. Select web search. max_results. 1. April 17th, 2026, 7:56:54. Web search. Query. Malcador The Sigillite. Golden Throne. Warhammer 40. K-Lore. Primarch's intended. April 17th, 2026, 7:57:06. Web search. Query. Magnus Red Primarch, Golden Throne, Psychic Powers, Emperor Original Plan, Warhammer 40, Kael, April 17th, 2026, 7:57:17. Web search. Query. Warhammer 40, K Primarchs, Psychic Powers, Sanguinius, Lorgar, Psychic Abilities, Golden Throne Candidates, April 17th, 2026, 7:58:31. Right, file_path, C:, // users, / shadow, / desktop, / compiled binaries, / Claude code, generation v, 2, / output, files, / Warhammer, what if, 2 hours, 12 characters, / video number 15, script IDK, / outline.md, content, #Malcador The Sigillite, left a sealed message to be opened. 10,000 years after his death, it named the Primarch W, April 17th, 2026, 7:59:44. Right, file path, C, users are shadows, desktop just, compiled binaries is Claude code, generation v2 to output files, Warhammer, what if, 2 hours, 12 characters odd video 115, script IDK, chapter 1. .txt, content. There are few secrets in the dying light of the 41st millennium more carefully guarded than those buried beneath the IM. April 17th, 2026, 8:01:04. Right. File_path. C:, / users, / shadow, / desktop, / compiled binaries, / Claude code, generation horse to 2 / output files, / Warhammer, what if 2 hours, 12 characters, / video, #15, script IDK, / chapter 2, .txt, quote, comma, quote, content, quote, quote, the psychic sphere blazed with energy that transcended the physical realm, comma, its light casting shadows that moved independent. April 17th, 2026, 8:02:28. Right pipe, quote, file, _ path, quote, quote, C:, / users, / shadow, / desktop, / compiled binaries, / Claude code, generation var 2, / output files, / Warhammer, what if 2 hours, 12 characters, / video number 15, script IDK, / chapter 3, .txt, content. The archives beneath the Imperial Palace held more than books and data slates. They held the weight of 10,000 years, April 17th, 2026, 8:03:51. Right, file path. C, users, dust shadows, desktop disaster, compiled binaries, Claude code, generation v2 output files, Warhammer, what if, 2 hours, 12 characters, id video nosast 15, script IDK, chapter 4, .txt, content. The journey to Baal carried weight beyond the mere crossing of stellar distances. Guilliman's strike cruiser, cut through, April 17th, 2026, 8:06:01. Right, file path, C. Users wrought shadows, desktops, compiled binaries, or Claude. Code generation, Vitors output files with Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 characters, video 15. Script IDK, chapter 5, .txt, content. The revelation had opened doorways in the minds of the blood angels that could never be sealed again. In the days that, April 17th, 2026, 8:07:21, write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation naught, 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 channels / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 6 .txt, content. In the depths of the eye of terror, where reality bent to the whims of chaos and time flowed like molten silver, Magnus, April 17th, 2026, 8:08:48. Write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation Volvis to 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 channels / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 7.txt, content. Across the galaxy, something stirred in response to truth unveiled. On 1,000 battlefields where the sons of Sangui, April 17th, 2026, 8:10:15, write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation 5, 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 channels / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 8 .txt, content. The Golden Throne trembled for the first time in 10,000 years, deep within the heart of the Imperial Palace, where, April 17th, 2026, 8:11:38, write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation V, 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 characters / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 9 .txt, content. Reality shuddered as truth unveiled rippled across the galaxy like shock waves from a collapsing star. The revelation? To April 17th, 2026, 8:13:03. Write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation 5, 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if? 2 hours, 12 channels / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 10 .txt, content. The knowledge that had shattered across the galaxy like glass from a broken window now demanded response beyond mere you, April 17th, 2026, 8:14:29. Write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation 5, 2 / output files / Warhammer. What if 2 hours, 12 characters / video number 15, script IDK / chapter 11 .txt, content. The moment of decision crystallized into action with the finality of a star's death. In the deepest chambers beneath T, April 17th, 2026, 8:15:49, write, file_path, C:/, users / shadow / desktop / compiled binaries / Claude code, generation file, 2 / output files /Warhammer. What if - 2 hours - 12 characters / video number 15. Script IDK / chapter 12 .txt quote, comma, quote, content, quote, colon, quote, the Golden Throne rose before Sanguinius like a monument to 10,000 years of accumulated necessity. In the vast sea, April 17th, 2026, 8:16:14. Glob pipe, quote, pattern, quote, colon, quote, chapter *, .txt, quote.